Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Barbara Franklin. She is the president and CEO of Barbara Franklin Enterprises. She also served as Commerce Secretary under President George H.W. Bush and played a critical role both in negotiating and advancing the North American Free Trade Agreement, better known as NAFTA. NAFTA is now about to be replaced by the U.S Mexico-Canada Agreement, better known as USMCA. So what does Secretary Franklin see as the big differences? And are the changes good, bad, or somewhere in the middle? And we'll get her thoughts real briefly on the phase one of the China trade agreement. And Secretary Franklin, thanks very much for being with us.
Delighted to be with you.
So as we're about to transition here from NAFTA to USMCA officially in the not-too-distant future, what's your appraisal of USMCA? And in the final analysis, what do you think the legacy is of NAFTA?
Well, I think this new agreement is a step up. And, when an agreement has been in effect as long as NAFTA, as you pointed out, it's more than really 25 years, it's always time to take a look at it again and see what needs to be upgraded and fixed. But I do think NAFTA has served a wonderful purpose, and if you look at what happened to trade among the three countries involved, it really escalated over the time frame we're talking about. So I think we can consider NAFTA a success, but okay, now it's time to look at it again. And I think what's come out here is good. I think maybe the biggest thing in it is the automobile piece, meaning that more cars and truck parts are going to have to be made in North America. And that means 75% of the components in such vehicles need to be made in North America. That's up from 62.5%. And then also a large percentage, 30%, I believe it is in the agreement, of the work on a car must be done by workers who are making at least $16 an hour. Now, that really disadvantages Mexican workers if you look at what they make per hour. But the idea was that in total, this will really help North American workers. And we'll have to see how all this works out. Conceivably, car prices could go up a bit with respect to some vehicles made here. But the automobile thing, I think, is what those who worked on this think was the really big piece here. Canada has agreed to open its market for dairy products more for the U.S., and we like that. And another thing that I think is interesting in it is an upgrade in the environmental side of things and protecting, in particular, whales and fish and marine wildlife from pollution and overfishing. And I'm quite familiar with that because the Commerce Secretary has a lot in the U.S., has a lot to do with the fishing, the kinds of quotas of certain species that can be taken out, and that we really need to pay attention to that or we won't have certain kinds of fish. So I like that this agreement addressed that. Another thing that was in here with respect to Mexico, and that is that it makes it easier, or I should say this a different way. Mexican laws are to be changed to make unionization easier. And there is to be better monitoring of exactly what is going on there, more labor attaches in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico and so on. How all that's going to work, I think, remains to be seen. And there's a dispute settlement mechanism in here that at least the Canadian folks think is better than what we had before. So I think on balance, it's a relook at an agreement that really was a good agreement and advanced all of our economies. It's a relook at that, and it's an upgrade. And I truly believe that the trade agreements should be always looked at after a period of years, so that things that change can be included if there's a big change. Now, I think we also have to note that it hasn't been ratified yet by all three parties. Mexico did it last year. The U.S., both houses of Congress, in fact, the Senate just did that last week. But Canada is still out there, and that ratification has to take place. I believe the Canadian legislature is only coming back from a winter break today. So how long it will take for them to get that done, I don't know, because Prime Minister Trudeau has lost his majority in that body. So he will have to get some votes from some of the other parties. I think the betting is it will get done, but there will be a little bit of skirmishing along the way. So until Canada gets done, the whole thing isn't totally done.
Well, there certainly seem to be a lot of positives in there, Secretary Franklin, which is always good. Anything in there, since you mentioned that on balance you liked it, anything in there that made you cringe a little bit or made you think, I don't think I would have done that?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that very well. I'm not sure I would have insisted that the Mexicans change their laws to make unionization easier. But that seemed to be something that was really dictated from here. I probably wouldn't have done that, but then I wasn't on the firing line here either. So you want to, when an agreement like this is negotiated, you want to do it so that it will get approved. And that was crucial, I think, for the folks in the House who are in the majority right now, is that piece.
One of the things I've heard talked about that was an obvious need for an upgrade was intellectual property, given how much our economy has changed to the digital side in the past 25 years. And from what I'm hearing, most people seem pretty happy with the protections that were put in place here. What did you see?
Yes, I think that's right. Now, we had some, but as you say, intellectual property has become a hotter topic. But, yeah, I think that was good, too. That was an upgrade. That's also something that was in the Phase 1 China agreement, too, an upgrade of intellectual property protection.
And we'll get to
that. That's going to be a hot issue going forward in any trade agreements, any agreements. It's just our world is so technology-driven today that this is our secrets and our new discoveries need protection everywhere in the world.
Barbara, you mentioned the Phase 1 of the China deal in passing and the obvious need to address intellectual property issues there. The theft is one of the biggest concerns when it relates to trade with China. Obviously a long way to go here, but real quick, what do you think of Phase 1 and what would be at the top of your priority list heading into the rest of these negotiations?
That's a good question. Well, Phase 1 is a step forward. And it's calling a truce in this nearly 2-year trade war. And it's a floor, and that's how I view it, is a floor upon which we can then build other agreements and do more, hopefully more market opening and the kinds of things that our businesses have been concerned about for years, more reciprocity, more free and fair trade, and so on. And there's now strong consensus on both sides of the aisle, the political aisle, that we really need some behavioral change with respect to some of what China has been doing, particularly since it joined the WTO in 2001. So I think this Phase 1 deal will improve the atmospherics of the relationship, which really have gotten really rather sour. And hopefully that will improve. But the tensions that underlie this are still there. We have a lot of disagreement, and I think the next phase of negotiations will have to address that. One of the things that was not addressed, and there were some good things here addressed, and we mentioned intellectual property, the forced technology transfer, there were some improvements there. Oh, and then probably the thing that has gotten the most news attention is the purchases of U.S. products to the tune of $200 billion over the next 2 years, purchases by China, especially agriculture products. And that's to be $40 billion over the next 2 years. That's things like soybeans, cotton, pork. And, of course, our farmers here have welcomed that because the tariffs were cutting down on their ability to sell things to China. And I do have a question that I think we'll have to see how it plays out here. The most that U.S. farmers have sold to China was in 2013, and it was $29 billion worth. So the question is, can our farmers here make enough product to sell $40 $40 billion worth over the next 2 years. And in order for it to happen anyway, China has to lift some of its tariffs that came on as we were battling back and forth tariff to tariff and retaliation. China has to lift some of those tariffs so that those products from the U.S. can actually get in. One thing that was not addressed in this one that is a concern of mine and has been for quite a long time is the cyber theft and the stealing of our sensitive technology and other kinds of secrets of that kind. That will have to wait, I guess, until we get into phase 2 or 3, but that is a big one from where I sit. Now, the Chinese side does not like to touch that, I think, but I believe that one is really quite important. So where we are, I think, now is that this is a good first step, this phase 1. It's a floor, and we can all take a deep breath and say, okay, things are a little better in the relationship, but now we have to go forward. And while the U.S. has trimmed back some of its tariffs still are on Chinese goods, $360 billion worth of them. I believe that's to be leveraged in case China does not keep to what it's committed to in this agreement. And then we need to get to phase 2, and I'm hearing that's sort of after the election. We'll see what we do then, and maybe people are a little weary out of because of phase 1. But I think to continue the negotiating is really, really important. And the two sides now are going to continue to have dialogues a couple times a year. All of that had stopped. And I do think engagement is important if we're ever going to reach some understandings with each other on some of the really delicate issues, and there really are some. And I think fundamentally underneath this is what we have to put on the table, and it is on the table, and that is we've got two different systems here. Here we are in the U.S. with our democratic process and our free market capitalistic philosophy, and that's in fact what we do, whereas on the Chinese side, it's a different kind of regime. It's authoritarian, but it's capitalist also, but it's a different kind of capitalism. It's state capitalism. And those are two different systems. And it means that there's some different ways of doing things in each. And that makes negotiations not so easy. But it also makes them very important. So I am hopeful that we will get to phase 2 relatively expeditiously. And if we have to wait till after the election, okay, but then let's get to it and see where we go from there, because there still are a bunch of issues. One other one I should mention, financial services. There have been some openings there in this Phase 1 agreement. Now, some of that was already in the works and was announced by the Premier last summer, and that's banking, insurance, and securities. And that's good stuff. We have been wanting all of that, our business community, for quite some time. And there's a bilateral valuation and dispute resolution chapter in there, and that is something unusual and different to have it bilateral. And then there's a process outlined, and there could be remedial action on either side if someone doesn't play the game straight. So that's unusual. I think we'd have to see how all of that plays out. And as with any agreement, you've got to see how it works. You put it in place, and you hope for the best, and then you have to see how it works and keep a close eye. And if something needs to be fixed, then you want to go back to the table and fix it.
Barbara, excellent analysis. I have one question left for you because it just dawns on me, and we've heard a little bit about this over the past week, but we basically had the USMCA in Phase 1 almost conclude simultaneously here in the United States, and there's also recently been trade deals with South Korea and Japan. Clearly, one of the busiest men in Washington has been the trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, who's been in the game a long time. I'm sure you know him. What makes him so effective?
Well, he's very experienced, number one, and he's very smart, number two. Maybe that should come first. And he knows how to do this. And, that's where the experience comes in. He knows how to work an opinion and whatever through our own governmental process, the interagency process, and then he knows how to deal with those on the other side of the table. And it's just crucial. So I give him high marks for everything he has done. This has not been easy, but there's an awful lot going on, as much as I think I've ever seen simultaneously. And he and his team are doing a great job. And I have to tell you, to go back to NAFTA, even though that was done, of course, under the aegis of the trade representative, that office, and that was Carla Hills at the time. But there were 50 people from the Commerce Department who were engaged in the working groups, and some of the really crucial ones, like automobiles at that time, who contributed a great deal to the outcome. And that's always true. There are a variety of others around the government who are seconded or brought into the process to help the negotiations. But, I give these guys a lot of credit. This is not easy work today, and it's not going to get any easier, I suspect. So we wish them well.
Secretary Franklin, good to look back, good to look at the work still to be done, and also a little peek behind the curtain on how these negotiations are done. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it very much.
Great. Good to talk to you, Greg.
Thank you so much. Same here. Barbara Franklin, President and CEO of Barbara Franklin Enterprises, Commerce Secretary under President George H.W. Bush. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.